We've made it to episode 50 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. That's a milestone, I think.
That is
Sam.
Big milestone. And we're just about a year from our launch, right? We started with Rings of Power, and that was September 2022, and here we are.
So yeah, we've surpassed the year mark, I believe.
Yeah.
I think it was early September, if I recall.
I think so, because it premiered around Labor Day.
Yeah.
And I think very shortly after that, we started recording.
Yeah, I think it was like 3 episodes in we decided to do this, but I'm coming into this a little short-handed. My sciatic nerve, man.
Oh, no.
I turned 30, and then all of a sudden my
body
lower
starts
back,
falling apart.
Yeah, I move a little bit, and I have like a jolt of pain that goes down my left leg.
Well, that's very unfortunate.
But I'll pull a Jordan flu game, and I'll get through this.
If Michael
Jordan, if Michael Jordan can do it, I can do it.
Listen, I'm not as worried about the podcast as I am about a week in France, where we'll be walking around the streets of Paris and walking around the beaches of Normandy and all that stuff.
It'll be a lot of sitting too, and I'll just bring a bunch of painkillers. We'll be fine.
Yeah, there you go. Get drugged up.
Yeah, the entire time. I'll forget the entire trip. That's the goal.
Once in a lifetime, unforgettable, except I was on all those painkillers.
It's actually second for me, so I think I can get away with it.
That's true. Likewise.
Second in a lifetime. We're in the middle of a little series that we're currently doing. We're doing a cursory glance at the Lord of the Rings extended edition films, kind of talking about what has been continued to be left out of the books into the movie adaptations, and if there's anything in terms of the extended editions that we really enjoyed or thought was good to leave out of the theatrical editions. We're kind of talking about the general stuff right now, and we are currently on part 2 of Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, so we pick up right after the Council of Elrond and the formation of the Fellowship, and our very first scene is with Aragorn at his mother's grave. And this is something that you talked about actually briefly in our last episode. I guess this, and I...
Little tease.
Yeah, a little forecast of what we're doing. So I guess maybe, Sean, you want to take it off there and then go, and then just kind of continue through the movie?
Yeah, so for me, this was a good part, so for me, this was a good scene to include. We get more of Aragorn's backstory. Elrond's basically talking to him while he's removing some debris from his mother's headstone.
Which, you think, real quick aside, I mean, it's not like the elves have a lot going on. You'd think they would maintain their graveyard a little bit better than that. There was some pretty serious buildup there.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, though, probably not very many elves have died in the last couple hundred years in Rivendell. So maybe it's not even...
Actually, that's a good point. Does anybody die? Like, does Rivendell even have a graveyard where bodies are buried?
I'm assuming they probably do.
But who's dying?
Well, thinking back to wars and conflicts and things like that. Rivendell's been around for quite a while, so it may have been around long enough to see some burials for soldiers and things, or memorials. Sure. But you have a human death, and she's buried in Rivendell. We have a scene where Aragorn is removing some debris from her tomb, from her gravesite, and there's a very important line where Elrond says to Aragorn, "She brought you here thinking you'd be safe, taking you away pretty much from your destiny, more or less." And then Aragorn has the line, "He doesn't want the power." And then there's the difference, if you will, between our two members of the Fellowship, our two human members of the Fellowship. You have one who desperately craves the power to defend his home, and then you have one who is trying to hide from the power and has been hiding from power his entire life. So I thought that was a great scene, not necessary for the movie. It was okay to be in the extended edition, but I
There
thought it
were
added some good gravitas to the film.
It does, and you understand why we don't need it in the theatrical version. There's also another scene later between Aragorn and Boromir that was cut from the theatrical release, and it really, I will say that I appreciated having that additional scene in the extended edition because it helps flesh out Boromir's fall. And I think if there's one critique of the theatrical release, it was the Boromir turn could have used a little bit more
Development.
yeah, a little bit more substance there. And I think that was one of my takeaways from my most recent reread of The Lord of the Rings was Tolkien does a lot to show just through talking about how he's looking, how his appearance and his manner of illustrating that fall. And so I appreciated the additional scenes, the contrast with Aragorn, and then also the dialogue and opportunity to see Boromir kind of struggling with the ring temptation.
Yeah, that scene you're referencing, I wrote in my notes, more development between Aragorn and Boromir, talking about Gondor in particular. And it makes Boromir's death scene way more impactful when you have that development between the two characters.
And that's in Lothlorien, right? When they're like, have you seen the White Tower?
No, I think it's when they're on the riverboat, like halfway through their journey before they get to Argonath or something like that. We have that line where Boromir is talking to Aragorn and he references like a hero's return for the both of them.
Yes.
And Boromir says the lords of Gondor have returned, and he's talking about the celebration of the two of them arriving in the White City. That scene to me is pivotal for the emotion of the death scene because it's a direct call. Aragorn has a direct callback to it where he says they will look for his coming from the White Tower, but he will not return. And like, I get emotional every time I watch that scene in the theatrical cut, but when you watch it in the extended, there's so much more development that it's way more impactful.
I think there's an extra shot of Aragorn putting on Boromir's bracers. Which you don't. I think it was one of those things where you, at this point, 20 years later, there's so many little clickbaity articles saying, 13 details from the Lord of the Rings that you didn't notice. And it's one of those that pops up a lot. But the extended edition, they do a good job of showing Boromir with the bracers and then showing Aragorn very intentionally putting them on after they send Boromir over the Falls of Rhoros.
Continuing down chronologically, one of the next scenes that I thought was an extended edition scene was Bill the pony being set free.
Yeah, I had a similar thought. I don't think that's in the theatrical version.
I think in the theatrical, it's just like all of a sudden Bill's gone.
Yes.
So that was a nice reference. Except the one thing that I realized that in the books, don't they hear like wolves coming too? Like, aren't they attacked by wolves at some point?
They are attacked by wolves in the book. That was the main thing. And Sam is very fearful of Bill being eaten by the wolves. And I think they hear them howling. And that's one of the reasons why they go into Moria is that they know like you've got the wolves hunting them, spies of Saruman with the Creebane, and then obviously
the Caradhras.
So there's a little bit more kind of direct threat to the Fellowship, but we don't really have that in the extended edition. And to be quite frank, this is one of those things where we only get one scene with him, and it's when he's leaving. I'm talking about Bill the Pony. So why have him at all, really? I mean, there's in the book, there's some other good stuff with Bill and Sam and demonstrating Sam's kind of humanity. And
we had referenced that one of the things that we may have wished to see from the books was Bill Ferny. I believe we mentioned that in the last episode.
We did,
talking about the first half, but
yeah.
I mean, if you're not going to have Bill Ferny, the whole Bill the Pony plot line is kind of just unnecessary.
Yeah, it's one of those Poochie went back to his home planet type things.
Yeah.
Or is it Poochie? I can't remember. Oh my god. I think it's Poochie.
I have no
Itchy,
idea what you're
scratchy.
talking
Oh, yeah,
about.
you
So
weren't allowed to watch The Simpsons, right?
I don't know if we weren't allowed to watch it.
Haley always says that you guys were not allowed to, or she was not allowed to.
I mean, I don't remember that. My parents may have eased up by the time I was understanding what it was, but I think the Briggs household, it was always Seinfeld.
Which is so
And
funny.
I think it was like Seinfeld and Friends were on
Yep.
back to back
Yep.
on
NBC
whatever.
must see TV
Yeah.
Thursday. Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we watched. So
Well, it's funny because one could imagine the reason that you wouldn't show or you wouldn't allow your child to watch The Simpsons. Oh, it's too irreverent and all that. But then you're watching Seinfeld, where there's Seinfeld is just all like sex jokes. Not all, but it's a ton of sex jokes. And I remember not knowing anything about sex, but think or understanding that there was a joke here about something that I didn't quite understand. Like saw my parents laughing, then I was and I would ask like, "What are they talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, don't worry about it. Look, it's Kramer."
nothing, Sammy.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, back to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Much more
back to Lord of
serious
the Rings.
topic.
Moving down the chronological list, the next scene that was included in the extended editions is a mithril scene where they're looking down into the mine and Gandalf kind of puts his light on it and the whole mine shaft starts to glow and they have a conversation about mithril. And Gandalf says, Bilbo never knew this, but his mithril vest is worth more than the entire Shire. And then it's a nice little cue in on Frodo's face as he's like, holy shit.
Yeah, I was really appreciating the oh my god, Elijah Wood's portrayal. He does such a good job as being this out of really out of his element hobbit who is brave, who's dealing with this burden. But there are moments where he just looks like a little kid, kind of scared and unsure. And you had that great scene with Gandalf. But going back with when he gets the mithril shirt from Bilbo, they're picking up a thread from our podcast last week about like the time compression that we have in the adaptation from the novels to the books or from the novels to the movies. Bilbo says something like, "Oh, it's my old ring." You know, it's something along those lines when he's giving the mithril shirt and telling Frodo to try it on. And he sees the ring. We have that great jump scare scene, which made me think it hasn't really been that. If you can't really call it my old ring, as far as we know, it's been a season, right? He left on his birthday, and then we don't have any idea how much time passes, and it doesn't seem like a ton we don't get a sense of how much time has passed. So it's really like, oh, that ring I haven't seen in 3 months.
Yeah, and that's the problem. One of the few problems with the movies is that I think we've mentioned multiple times through 50 episodes where we would have liked to have had like a montage maybe scene of time passing because it's like 17 years, right?
It's 17
Something
years
like
in the books, yeah, because Frodo is 33, coming of age.
Yeah.
When Bilbo leaves, and then he's 50, which was the same age that Bilbo was when Bilbo went on his adventure.
Yeah.
And the reason that I guess that it ties into the Elijah Wood's portrayal, because Elijah Wood, I can't remember how old he was when they filmed, but he wasn't.
Oh, he was like 19 or 20.
I was going to say it's really young. Like he looks like a kid. And granted, who's to say how hobbits age and whatnot, but I'm really glad that they left it ambiguous about exactly how old Frodo was, because there's like, oh, Frodo's 50 Hobbit years. It would have been a little bit of dissonance, right? You'd had to spend a little bit too much time explaining the life cycles of hobbits and things like that. It does so much better leaving it ambiguous how old he is, and then you really get Elijah looking like, at the beginning kind of a little kid who's out of his way out of his league, and by the end you can see the kind of transformation he's gone through.
Yeah, just that showing us the time passing would make the phrase "my old ring" workable. But
yeah, I mean, you could do something like a year. It's been a year, and we see Elijah, or we see Frodo toasting Bilbo's health or something like that, and it's like, happy 134th birthday, or what is it, 100 and not
12,
112. I was combining
Jesus.
I was combining their ages.
That was disgusting.
Uh, excuse me. Anyway, we were going through Moria.
Yeah, next scene. This I don't think is an extended scene, anything about it, but I was reading an article and I just wanted to talk about it quick. But the scene right when the Balrog is first like coming down that huge walkway with all of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
pillars,
Hmm.
and you hear the noises and the orcs run away, and Gandalf is describing the Balrog, and he says, "This foe is beyond any of you." And then it cuts to Legolas, and the the article I read made me really really appreciate that scene, because out of all of the characters in the Fellowship, only one of them would really have any feasible understanding of how dangerous a Balrog is. And when they cut to Legolas, like the fear in his eyes at the understanding of what it is, I thought that was just great
Yeah.
cinematography. And I mean, I'm sure Peter Jackson probably did it intentionally, because why wouldn't you cut to anybody else in the Fellowship?
Well,
Why would you pick the elf?
I
But
think in the book, Legolas is the one who calls it a Balrog.
yeah, I mean, it could be right, but I just rewatched that scene when we were watching the second half, and then it made me think of that article, and it was
I
impactful.
I noticed that Legolas is the only one who gets a reaction shot, and yeah,
Yeah.
and it makes sense for the lore reasons that he would
Mhm.
know. Like it's probably like that's the spooky story that elf parents tell their children,
Mhm.
right? The Balrog's going to get you.
This demon.
Yeah.
The next extended scene is Lorien. We get the scene in the tree stands when they first enter the woods. And to me, necessary, because we get more of an interaction between Haldir. Any more screen time for Haldir is a good thing, especially once you get to the two towers. The theatrical cut, I mean, it's a guy who's barely been in it, and they get some emotional resonance
You get the
with,
hug with Aragorn, right?
yeah, the hug, and then just the reference to like, there was once an alliance, we're here to honor that allegiance. And so there's some emotional weight to it, but then having more scenes with Haldir, I think, gives him more development that makes more emotion later
So,
on.
question for you: did you catch a little line of dialogue when I think it was Aragorn or maybe Legolas was talking to Haldir, and they said Haldir, and I think they called him Haldir Inglorian. Did you hear that? Do they
I
give
did not.
him? Do they give him that last name? I should look that up
Yeah, you should. I do not recall a surname for Haldir.
again, and I think that would tie into. Oh well, we know what the references they're talking about from
Mhm.
earlier in the Fellowship. Keep going. I'm just going to look this up real quick.
In that same scene, we have a nice line from Boromir to Frodo, which so shows, I think, Boromir not under the influence of the ring in this moment, where he says to Frodo, you carry the weight of us all, don't carry the dead. Then it's a very sincere, heartfelt comment or phrase that he's saying to Frodo. And again, all of these Boromir scenes, the theatrical edition does him super dirty. In the books, like you said, we have all of this development. You have phrasing about his behavior becoming more erratic and things like that. But having these scenes in the extended editions where you can see Boromir not being just a dick all the time makes his fall and redemption arc of trying to save the hobbits and dying doing so just way more impactful.
Yeah, we get a little bit of that, and I think one of the challenges with the screen adaptation is you've got to do something with everybody in, especially like the Balin tomb fight scene, and you don't really get to showcase as much Boromir's martial prowess, right? Because you have to keep it interesting. So he gets knocked to the ground and Aragorn saves him, and then it's kind of just mixed in there with everybody fighting orcs, and then you really just get his showing up at the end to save the hobbits, which is great. But yeah, you don't get some of the build up to establish him as this heroic figure. He kind of comes off like a jerk from the beginning, and then
Mhm.
was that an extended scene? His line to Frodo.
I think so, because it's
I,
up in the it's either up in the tree stands. I'm almost positive it's up in the tree stands. And I don't think that's in the
they cut out all the tree stand
theatrical.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think it's them, they meet Haldir and then they go to
yeah.
Lothlorien.
They don't even get the like establishing shot for Lothlorien and Haldir saying like welcome to Karas Galadon or whatever, the heart of
Mhm.
Lorien or the heart of elfdom in on Earth or something like that. I think that's all extended edition. And
I mean, and my problem too is that it's been so long since I've watched the theatrical editions that
oh yeah.
maybe for this we should have watched theatrical and then watched extended to like
Hey,
be able to
how
get the
much
differences.
time are we spending on this?
Because right now we're kind of just like, I think this was an extended
Well,
scene.
I think part of it is just the extended versus theatrical, but also just the overall like
Yeah.
for me too. It's the interesting stuff. The really interesting stuff is having recently reread the books and having a kind of greater appreciation for the adaptation that the film achieved. What are the how are things translated from the book? So, for instance, one thing that I think would have been cool to see and would not have been that out of the ordinary would have been to see Gollum in Lothlorien, kind of sniffing at the base of the tree, or somehow just give him a scene to establish it, because we see him in Moria,
Then we
and
see
then
him on the river.
we see him on the river, but in the book he was tracking the Fellowship even in Lothlorien, and that would have been cool just to kind of establish the fact that
The danger.
yeah, the danger, and like the elves don't, he slipped by the elven sentries, right? So this, that he's sneaky and he's determined. And think there's even a scene that was cut from the extended editions. The film, they shot the scene, but it never made it into anything, of showing the Lothlorien elves like slaughter all of the orcs that follow the Fellowship out of Moria.
Oh, there's a petition
I saw
for
that.
New Line Cinema to release the super extended editions.
Yes.
That include even like I'm just guesstimating, but like 30 minutes to another hour of footage per film. Which
apparently Peter Jackson shot 7 million feet of film.
Damn.
Which, and granted, some of those are going to be reshots of the same scene and whatnot, but I think it's something like 1,300 hours of film.
Yeah. So there's got to be stuff that's film worthy. That's just on the cutting board.
I think there's a ton of prologue stuff that they ended up cutting, which, I mean, I think
maybe they didn't have the rights to. If it was too Silmarillion-y, who knows?
Yeah, we'll see.
Next extended scene.
But to be fair, they talked about Morgoth. They name check Morgoth in the extended edition. That's, I don't know if his name appears in the Fellowship or in the Lord of the Rings.
It might.
Maybe in the appendices.
I mean, there's references to Beren and Luthien, so I wouldn't be surprised.
That's true too. Yeah. Well, that's in the scene. That's I think because
that's in extended editions, but it's also in the book. So I'm saying, it's a direct reference to Silmarillion characters. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they name drop Morgoth.
I think they could name drop it if it was in the Lord of the Rings, the book itself, and I think maybe they do reference Morgoth and they reference Beren and Luthien in the book Lord of the Rings.
Thank you for repeating what I just said.
No, but I said it differently and better.
The next extended scene, we have more of Gandalf's lament of the elves singing, Legolas saying he cannot translate because for him the pain is still too near. And then we have Sam's attempt at a song. What'd you think of Sam's song, Sam?
I thought it was pretty good. He's a harsh critic, and to be fair, he came up with that rather quickly. So keep working on it, Samwise.
Next up, we have Gimli and Galadriel moment, which is another direct reference to Fëanor and the Silmarillion, where when Galadriel's giving out the gifts to all of the members of the Fellowship, Gimli asks her for a strand of her hair, and he says something like, "I will never look on anything as fair as you." And then there's a conversation between Legolas and Gimli. And then Gimli says, "I asked for a hair. She gave me 3." That is a huge reference because in the Silmarillion, Fëanor asks Galadriel for her hair, and she says no. to one of the most famous lords of elves ever to exist. But to a lowly dwarf, she grants the request. And then another scene where they cut to Legolas and show his recognition of what had just transpired.
Well, I would have liked a little bit of dialogue from Legolas in that moment, or maybe later on, to demonstrate the significance to Legolas of that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the book, I think like that's the turning point kind of in their relationship, where once Legolas sees Gimli's feelings and reverence toward Galadriel, he softens to Gimli.
Mm-hmm.
And from
And then
that point forward, they're friends.
Yeah, and then we get more of it in the Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
With the crystal caves and all of that. Here's a scene that was left out of the book, left out of the extended edition that's in the book that I thought would have been important. But the scene of Legolas shooting down a fell beast on the other side.
Oh, yeah.
On the eastern side, we have the reference from Aragorn where he says, "Orcs patrol the eastern shores. We have to wait to cover of nightfall." But you never see any patrol happening. So it seems pretty safe when Frodo and Sam end up going in the middle of the day across the river.
There's even another reference to it. Yeah. Because I think when they're preparing to leave Lorien, I think Celeborn and Aragorn are having a conversation about how orcs are on the eastern shore, but there's also something they've heard reports of the other orcs bearing the mark of the white hand, which how did they hear those? Whatever, that's fine. It's a movie. You had to establish the threat.
I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, it would have been cool to have even a shot of them when they're coming down the river. You know, you got establish the, I guess it would have been confusing maybe. So you have the scenes with the Uruk-hai kind of running through the woods, and then to also have other different orcs on the other side of the bank. It might have been a little confusing, but yeah, the fell beast interaction, Legolas shooting it down, that would have been very cool.
Well, it would have been a cool night scene, like one of those nights when they're paddling down the river. Just
full moon.
It could be like right after they leave Lorien, have like a group of orcs on one side and then have them shoot it down. And then it would just make Frodo and Sam going off on their own a little bit more dire.
Yep.
Because instead it's like Aragorn says, "Oh, we can't go in the middle of the day." But then they just easily go in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And they're fine.
Yeah.
And then my last little note here, I legit tear up every time when Boromir dies and you have that interaction. "I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king." And then Aragorn stands up and says, "They will look for us coming from the White Tower, but he will not return." Chokes me up every GD time. The only thing that I would have liked in this moment from the books would have been the song that Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli sing. There's a lot, and I know it's one of my critiques of The Hobbit is that they include way too many of the silly songs. But this one isn't a silly song, though. This one is like an emotional, deep song. And I don't know, I would have liked a little bit more than, I mean, the one line we get from Aragorn is great, don't get me wrong, but just a little bit more would have done me good.
Yeah. Well, and then there also would have been an interesting resonance with him singing at the end of Return of the King as well.
Yeah. Because you'd already established that Aragorn's a singer.
Yeah.
And you don't get it in Rivendell because we don't get the scenes of Aragorn and Bilbo. That's something that they left out.
In the Hall of Fire?
Yeah. Of Aragorn and Bilbo coming up with poems and singing. And
well, we get the Beren and Luthien song that he kind of sings to himself in the middle of the night, and Frodo wakes up and asks him what it is. Right?
Aragorn sings so much in the books, though, that
I think
a little bit more.
I think it was something where I bet during the just pre-production, like, okay, how much of the songs are we going to incorporate into the movie? Because if you don't execute it properly, it would kind of throw your audience, I think. I don't know about you, but as a younger person reading The Lord of the Rings, I would skip some of the songs.
Oh, like, you bastard.
I know. And as an adult, I'm like, these are great. Like, it's a fantastic part. I always like the songs in The Hobbit, but the songs are more goofy. And it's more of their children rhyming songs, basically. In The Lord of the Rings, like, the songs are deep lore. And
deep cuts.
And as an adult, I can appreciate it. As a mature reader who's done it, who's read the book several times, loves the movies, I would appreciate it. But I think they probably just made a call like, hey, we can't put too many songs into this movie, or people aren't going to take it seriously. You're going to bore your teenage boy audience, and who came for the orcs and the fighting and the whatnot. But yeah,
I say fuck them. Who cares?
well, I'm glad the movie was successful. So if we got a weird art house Lord of the Rings, I don't know if it would have been the cultural phenomenon that it was.
Agreed. Well, that's all my notes for the second part of Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, I think there's maybe just a little less to talk about because of just the amount of exposition that they had to get into the Fellowship, and somehow the extended scenes kind of facilitated that. One observation I did make was, I think in this half of the Fellowship, some of that 20-year-old CG, it shows a little bit, especially when you've got the shots in Moria where it's you see the Fellowship at a distance, like when they're running down the collapsing stairs. You can tell that all of those far shots are CGI, and the animations look very, very obviously like they're walking awkwardly, which you can, I mean, 20 years later, watching in HD, paying close attention to everything, it sticks out, but it's not game breaking, right? It's not going to ruin your experience.
No, and that's what I came away with, that there's so much other stuff that they do well in terms of CGI and practical effects from 20 years ago that, I mean, I didn't even notice that scene in Moria. Like nothing
Yeah.
seemed off to me.
Well,
And I guess the action of everything too, like, distracts me from what might be dated CGI, but
well, the thing, what really works in their favor is that it's dark, right? And if you had to show it in the full light of day, for instance, I think some of the stuff in the warg fight in Two Towers, it's a little bit harder to hide the CGI because everything has to be illuminated. But when you're under the mountain in Moria, you can use fire, you can use darkness to kind of distract somewhat to minimize the effect of the CG. And then where I think they really poured their CG budget was into the Balrog, which looks phenomenal and it looked great 20 years ago, and it continues to look great. Like that looks like a being of flame and shadow.
The Balrog in Rings of Power and the Balrog from Fellowship of the Ring, to me, look exactly the same in terms of quality.
Yeah.
Okay. It's Tuesday and we're kind of recording late in the game. So this episode is dropping on Wednesday the 27th. I don't think we're going to be able to record for an episode next week, Sam.
No, I think we will probably, I hate to say it, but we might have to take 2 weeks off because think about it. We're going to be traveling. We're going to be in France on Sunday. And then we're traveling back the next Sunday.
Yeah, on Saturday.
Oh, we come back on Saturday?
We come back on the 7th. We can record on Monday the 9th, man.
Okay, well, then
or Tuesday the 10th.
Fuck it, we'll do it live. All right, cool.
Yeah. We'll just skip 1 week.
Yeah. All right, everybody.
Plus, so we're going to be on a plane for like 20 hours, so we'll just watch these while we're.
Do you think they have they probably do.
No, I'll download them.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Yeah,
well,
that's my plan.
I'm not bringing any technology other than my phone, and I don't think Lord of the Rings would look good on my phone. Plus, I'm going to have a 6-month-old baby who's going to refuse to sleep probably and demand to be held, and then want to crawl everywhere
for an entire flight.
Yeah, because that's what
Thank
we're doing.
God I'm not on your flight.
Oh, you're not, are you?
No, I'm direct from Seattle, man. So when your baby's crying on the plane, I will be.
You'll be sleeping soundly
somewhere else.
Yeah, great. Okay, well.
Which karma? I'm probably gonna have like a baby right behind me crying this entire flight now.
When we went out to Idaho over the summer, and the baby was great on the flights. So knock on wood, that's what we get. Hopefully the overnight aspect of it, she'll be tired, she'll be sleeping. Otherwise, it's going to be a long 8 hours. Anyway, on that note.
Do our sign off because I don't want to do it.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. This has been L's Rings and Nerdy Things. If you like what you heard, give us a like, subscribe, share on Facebook. We have a Facebook community page where you can chat, answer some discussion prompts. I think we had some polls up for the Lord of the Rings Melee fantasy draft that Sean and I did with a friend of the show, Mike Ingram. You can also subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends. We are in the middle of our extended edition Lord of the Rings watch through. We are taking each movie, splitting it in half, and discussing one half per week. So now's your chance. We're taking a little break. Catch up with the movies. Join us for the Two Towers and the Fellowship of the Ring. And we will see you when we see you. Bye.
See ya, everybody.